What's going on, guys? It's Nick here, back with another video. Today we're taking a look at my current rest of season rankings, talking about the players who have fallen the most over the last 2 weeks. For those of you who have access to the website, I've updated the rest of season rankings to also be a trade calculator. All you have to do is add up the value column of the players you're receiving against the players you're trading away. The team that ends up with the most value is the one that I think is winning the trade. As I've always said, though, nothing happens in a vacuum. So let's say you've got a bunch of wide receivers and not many running backs, and you're trading away those wide receivers. You can afford to lose the trade in terms of value because wide receivers are less valuable to you. So still understand that is there. I think I'm going to add a note to it at the top. But if you haven't checked it out, please do so. So we'll get into my biggest fallers in a second. But first, of course, have to start things off as usual. Stat of the day. Yesterday's stat was which wide receiver currently is averaging the least amount of separation in the NFL. The answer is Allen Robinson. DeVonta Wilson was the first to get that right on YouTube, and @Birch1982 was the first to get that right on Twitter. Today's stat. Among wide receivers with at least 20 targets, who is currently leading the league in yards per target? Okay, so again, starting off with tight ends, quarterback is not much changes. Still very little movement at the tight end position. The only faller inside the top 10 was Hawkinson. I dropped him from the tight end 3 to the tight end 5, I believe. Behind now Pitts and Mark Andrews. This does not have a lot to do with Hawkinson being bad. I mean, he's got 9 and 11 targets in the last 2 weeks. He's been really solid, really good as a tight end. It's just the other two have really stepped it up. We saw Andrews have an explosion week. He's been performing better. And then, of course, Pitts has gained a ton of value these last 2 weeks. He's pretty firmly, I would say, the tight end 2 or 3. You can make a case for him ahead of Waller, especially with Waller being banged up now, not performing as well as we'd hoped. You could make a case for Pitts as the tight end 2 and definitely the tight end 1 in dynasty leagues right now. But Pitts is performing phenomenally. Basically had to move him ahead of Hawkinson. Aside from that, no movement inside the top 10. Well, I guess now people have moved outside the top 10. So Knox dropped 5 spots after he broke his hand. Obviously, you break your hand, you're dropping in the rankings. But I think I'm going to move him up a good amount because he, at least like after this next week, he is expected to not miss very much time, maybe only like 2 games. So he could return very, very quickly. This is not an injury that it's like, oh, he's going to miss 2 months with this injury. He's going to come back pretty quickly. And once he does, he's going to be very valuable because, of course, on the Bills had their bye week. So he's going to not have a bye when he comes back. He's going to be on a very, very high scoring offense. Guy that they use in the red zone, so he's going to be valuable when he comes back, but when you break your hand, you have to drop. I dropped Higbee down 5 spots as well to tight end 15. He only has 1 game over 50 receiving yards. He has 0 games with over 5 receptions this season. The ceiling doesn't seem to be there. The floor for most tight ends is like 0 anyways, so when you don't have that ceiling, you kind of have to be in that tight end 2 range. I was hoping he'd be much more involved in this offense, but even when they're spiking in pass attempts, it doesn't seem like he has such a large role where he's going to go out there and have games where he has like 7 for 120 to score. That doesn't really seem like it's in his range of outcomes this season like we'd hoped it could be. So yeah, more of like a tight end 2 for him. And then also I dropped down Njoku. We bump him up after that week 5 explosion. Maybe that was going to be the time where he gets more snaps, gets more targets, especially with all these injuries. And then these last few weeks hasn't really done anything. And so when you've got, Landry missing time, the running backs missing time, Odell being banged up, and Njoku is still not performing great, I had to drop him in the ranking. So again, not much has changed amongst tight ends, just a little bit of movement there. We basically know who the good tight ends are. At quarterback, none of the higher end options have dropped, but some of the streaming options have. So I dropped Sam Darnold, Justin Fields, Baker, and Jared Goff in the rankings. Basically, all of these should be very, very self-explanatory. We've got Darnold, Fields, Goff just being really, really bad recently. And then, of course, Baker injures his shoulder. That's not a great injury. You don't want that happening. Plus, it's a run-first offense, at least when they have at least one healthy running back. But even, their backup running backs are performing phenomenally. So this is just a great, great, great run offense with an injured quarterback. You don't want their quarterback in fantasy, obviously. But yeah, really just nothing has changed as far as like the top 10 quarterback's concerned, we know who the starters are. Everyone else is just a streaming option. Just play guys who are playing bad defenses. On to the part everyone cares about, though, the running backs and wide receivers. And we will start off this week with the running backs. And we'll start off with the injury drops. So Christian McCaffrey is down 11 spots to the running back 12. Obviously, a reaction of him being put back onto the IR. They said he didn't suffer a setback. Let's be honest, he suffered a setback. Kareem Hunt down 14 spots to the running back 33. He was placed on the IR with a calf injury. He's expected to miss 6 weeks. Could it push further than that? Obviously, if he doesn't recover quickly, but he's probably going to miss, a month and a half to 2 months. And then, of course, we have Chris Carson down 11 spots, running back 34 after he was placed on the IR. A general discussion of this grouping is kind of what I wanted to start off with, because it's really, really difficult to rank these guys. You kind of have a top 30 running backs who are guys who have a role in their offense. They can score a touchdown. They can approach 10 and 12 touches in a week. And then once you get outside of that, you get more into that range where if you're playing them, you're just praying they fall into the end zone. You're praying they have, a 30, 40-yard play to get you some fantasy points. Because if you're starting the running back 40, he's probably not doing anything if he doesn't score a touchdown. And so I bumped these guys into the beginning of that range because, when they come back, they're going to be very valuable. And so we're not dropping them for scrubs who are absolutely of no value. But you've got Hunt that's going to miss 2 months. You've got McCaffrey, who we have no idea when he's going to return. He's on the IR, so we can only return so quickly. But then you've got him, and then you've got Carson. Carson could just miss the rest of the season, right? So if he's going to miss potentially the rest of the season, could return in week 10, but we have no idea. If you've got Hunt maybe not being back to the fantasy playoffs, McCaffrey again, who knows? It's it's really, really difficult to pin down exactly what the value is. I'm going to give a full take maybe on all of these guys, honestly. They might all show up in tomorrow's video. Remember, we're going to go over, just like last week, different scenarios. So let's say you are, we're going to be through 7 weeks at that point. You're 7-0 versus are you 5-2? Are you 2-5? Different scenarios, who you're trading for, who you're trading away. And I think these guys are going to kind of show up in that video. But just in short now, McCaffrey's obviously the most valuable because he is expected back first. I guess we don't know, but he's expected back first. And he is the most valuable when he is back. So even if he was back a little bit later than these guys, he's such a stud that when he comes back, you're really going to want him. Hunt, he's going to miss a lot of time. And so my thought right now is I'm not trading for Kareem Hunt because you're in an impossible spot with him. In just every scenario, really. You have him, you're in an impossible spot because you can't drop him. You can't give someone that edge, but then you can't really trade him away because what is someone trading you in return? Really, it would just be if you're in those scenario 1, scenario 2s where you've got a ton of wins. You're okay taking that risk with Hunt, but it's just you have to understand that you might not get him back until the fantasy playoffs, and then it's are you going to trust him at that point? Maybe not. So it honestly just might not be worth spending anything to trade him away and spending anything to get him back because it's in both scenarios, it's pretty unlikely to be able to get a deal done that's going to benefit your team. So I'll give a fuller take on all these guys in the video tomorrow. So just watch that video for a larger take. But in general, I had to drop these guys in the rankings because they're injured. They're going to miss time. For some of them, there's a chance they don't even come back in the fantasy season. And that's not good. So got 4 more names for you as far as the running backs are concerned that are not fallers because of injury, just fallers because of their situation. First up is Chase Edmonds, down 4 spots, running back 22. I still don't get why they're using James Conner so much, but they clearly like doing that, and they're not going to stop unless James Conner does get injured. Edmonds still has really solid value because he's efficient on the ground. He's got a nice role in the receiving game. It's just that he's more of a lower end running back 2 than a mid-range running back 2 because he hasn't scored a touchdown on 95 touches. The underlying volume is really, really solid, but if he's not going to score touchdowns because they keep giving James Conner the ball, then his value has to be a little bit lower. But still, let's be honest, the state of running back is garbage. He's still a guy you want on your team. I've also dropped David Montgomery down 4 spots to running back 32. This drop happened after the injury as a response, as I've talked about the last 2 weeks. This is a response to Khalil Herbert clearly being a legit NFL talent and someone they absolutely are going to continue using when Montgomery is back. So if by the trade deadline, could it happen where they trade Herbert or they trade Montgomery or they trade Williams? Those things could happen. But if that doesn't, which almost seems like the most likely outcome, but if that doesn't happen, this is going to be a huge committee on the Bears. And, I keep mentioning that, but it's and I talked about in the summer. It's I really like the talent of some of these players on the Jets maybe. But if Michael Carter's upside is the committee back on the Jets, that's not very fun. Right now, I again think Michael Carter to close the season can be the feature back. But the point is, when you look at some of these offenses that aren't that great, even if the player itself is really good, if it's a committee on the Bears, that's not fun. And that's not something I want in fantasy. And so I had to drop Montgomery because basically the only chance it's not a committee is if Herbert gets traded or injured or if Montgomery gets traded. And since those are not super likely outcomes, you have to drop them. And then obviously I had to tank Damien Williams as well in the rankings because he's clearly the third string running back on the Bears. So he's useless unless there's a trade. And then lastly, I tanked Trey Sermon. We've been talking about when Mitchell comes back. It was super obvious that Mitchell was going to be the guy. You should have been trading for Mitchell when he was injured, when they were going on bye. Those were the opportunities to trade for Mitchell. He's clearly the lead back. But I thought there was maybe a very small percent chance that I was wrong and that when Sermon and Mitchell on the field together, maybe after their bye week, maybe they start giving Sermon more work. No. It's very, very clear at this point. They come out of their bye. Mitchell's getting all the touches. Mitchell's the one they want to use. Sermon's not even seeing a touch. Sermon's done. For this season, unless we see an injury, there's just no reason to hang on to Sermon because even if Mitchell got hurt again, we saw what happens when Sermon's starting. They don't even trust him at all. And he has no upside even if Mitchell got hurt. And so it's just a deeper format stash, but you don't need to own Trey Sermon at this point. On to the wide receivers, where I have 8 followers for you. We'll start off with DeAndre Hopkins, down 3 spots to the wide receiver 12. Not only have the Cardinals not been on their bye yet, so he's been passed by a few people who have, but he has double-digit targets or 90 receiving yards in 0 games this season. 0 for 7, getting either 10 targets plus or 90 or more receiving yards. Hasn't done either of those things. The touchdowns have been great. They'll continue to be great. He could push for the league lead. But the floor and the ceiling are a bit lower than we'd hoped for because they're just spreading the ball around so much. And so he's more of a lower-end wide receiver 1 and closer to a wide receiver 2 than we'd really hoped for this season. We're hoping he'd be more like a mid-range 1. I also dropped DK Metcalf down 6 spots to wide receiver 14 and Lockett down 7 spots to wide receiver 29. As always with his Tuesday videos, I have not yet seen the Monday night game. And so is it possible that Geno Smith comes out there just firing away? Both these guys or maybe one of these guys goes off. Sure, and maybe I'll move them up a little bit in the rankings. But the Saints defense is really good, and they've had a really long time to prepare for this game. They're a team that historically is really good at preparing for games, especially when they have a lot of time. And so I'm not really expecting that to happen. But regardless, Metcalf and Lockett obviously see their value lessened with Geno Smith at quarterback instead of Russell Wilson. That I think we can all agree with no matter what happens in the Monday night game. Russ could return, and it's looking like he's going to return around week 10 or week 11. So that would be huge for these two, and it's why that I'm definitely not trading them away. Even if you're in a tough spot, that's not super far away. We're coming on week 8, and so if you can just kind of survive until week 10, and hopefully Wilson's back at that point, these two aren't going to see their value tank, right? I know I said they dropped, but they didn't go down that much. So someone's probably just buying low and giving you less than they're actually worth. And so if anything, if you can afford to, I'd rather just be trading for these two than trading them away, even with the drop in value. And that's going to be the same thing for the next 2 players. So first up, Calvin Ridley, down 3 spots, wide receiver 15. This Falcons offense is brutal to watch. How do you give Calvin Ridley 10 targets and convert that into 26 receiving yards? He has been incredibly inefficient. He's averaging 10.4 targets per game this season, 5.4 yards per target. It's just crazy how inefficient he's been. Obviously that needs to improve, and hopefully this breakout of Pitts is going to allow that to happen. But despite this level of production being concerning, the underlying usage is still very strong. I still absolutely believe in the talent of Calvin Ridley. And so I would rather just use this as an opportunity to buy low on a stud player as opposed to trading away a guy you got in the second round for probably not that much. Like, unless you're super desperate and they're offering you like a high-end running back, like no one's going to give you a running back one, but like a running back that you can really, really use and it's going to be very beneficial to your team and you can afford the loss of Ridley, that's a scenario where I'd trade him away. But for the most part, I would again just use this as an opportunity to buy Ridley because the underlying usage is solid. And then the same thing for DeVonta Smith, although obviously less confident in that because he's a rookie and he's on, man, can I even say he's on a much worse team? But I guess his situation's a little bit worse because they do have other players they can throw to. But it's a similar situation in that he's definitely the one. The usage overall is strong. 7.5 targets per game isn't 10.4 like it is for Ridley, but it's still good. Talent, absolutely there. DeVonta Smith's very talented. The problem is he's been so up and down, right? He's got 4 games with at least 60 receiving yards, and then 3 games with either 2 or 3 receptions for less than 35 receiving yards. So he's been very, very up and down. You kind of have to expect that, though. Not every rookie is Jamar Chase. Like, he's still very talented. He's having a really good rookie season overall. It's just, you got to compare him to Jamar Chase, and that's not really fair. Also, Hurts has looked lost at times recently, and that's going to cause the offense to definitely struggle. But like I said to start, I still think he's clearly their wide receiver one. He's getting really nice usage. And so, if anything, use this as an opportunity to trade for DeVonta Smith, even though the value is less. So use this as an opportunity to trade for Smith, trade for Calvin Ridley, because their value is dropping, but the overall market thinks it's dropping a lot more than it is because the usage is so strong. Someone whose value is definitely dropping, but who I would not be buying low on, is Odell. He's down 6 spots to running back, or to the wide receiver, 37 right now. But I'm probably going to move that closer to like the mid 40s this week. I don't know exactly where it's going to end up. But let's be honest. Like, when are you starting Odell and feeling good about it? He has no chemistry with Baker. And then Baker also has, a fracture in his shoulder and a torn labrum. Like, Baker is struggling, not because Baker's bad, Baker's regressing. Like, Baker is just injured, very clearly injured. And the connection already is just not there between these two. Like, Odell isn't cooked. I know a lot of people are saying he's cooked. Like, Odell's not awful. He's been getting open at times, but he just doesn't fit what they want to do. He doesn't fit this offense very well. I really had hoped when he joined this team that he was going to, but he doesn't. And he's probably going to have 1, 2, maybe 3 blow-up games, but I'm not starting him in hopes that this is the week for the rest of the season that he goes off, right? So he's a guy that his value right now is he's on your bench. You got 3 people on bye, and hey, you know what? We just survived this last week, or maybe we didn't survive, but some people survived this last week with all the injuries, all the bye weeks. I had one team that I had, I believe we have 7 bench spots and 2 IR spots, and it was entirely filled with people on IR and people on bye. I had absolutely no options, and there were 9 opportunities for me to put people on the bench and on the IR. That was a brutal week we just went through. We're probably not going to see this happen again unless injuries just continue to happen. But we survived the worst bye week so far. And so we're less likely now to have to be like, oh, who do I have on the bench that even has a pulse? Like last week, yeah, you're probably starting Odell because he had a pulse. But moving forward, we're unlikely to see this level of injuries and buys happen again. And so it's less likely you're forced into playing someone like Odell who just doesn't have a great role. It's not a good situation. It's a run-first offense. And so downgrading him and not someone I'm trading for. Allen Robinson, pretty similar situation. Down 11 spots, wide receiver 43. I'm not trading for Allen Robinson at this point. Fields isn't hurt. Like I say, it's a similar situation with Odell. Fields isn't hurt. He's just been really bad. And their connection isn't off. It's just that Mooney seems like the 1A. And they're just not throwing the ball because they don't trust Fields. And obviously, Allen Robinson's still very talented. Obviously, this offense has a lot of upside if they choose to throw the ball and they can at some point be successful in it because it's such a condensed target share. It's basically only targets are going to Mooney, Allen Robinson, and Kmet. And so if they can throw the ball 40 times, which is not asking a lot, and they can complete 30 of them, these guys are going nuclear. Right? Absolutely going to happen. It's just that they want to run the ball. They've been pretty good at running the ball, so it makes sense. And they don't trust Fields to throw it. And so if those things are happening, you just don't have the upside for the receivers. And so I had to drop Allen Robinson. And then finally, Tyler Boyd down 7 spots to wide receiver 51. This is due to everything we talked about over the summer. Chase is the clear alpha. Higgins is a good chunk more talented than Boyd. And so while Boyd will have a role and see targets, his spikes will be much less frequent. They won't be as high, and the off games are going to hurt more than they had in the past. I had him ranked 15 spots below ADP as a wide receiver 46 in draft season, and this is the first week where I've dropped him below that ranking. He is now the wide receiver 51 in the rest of season rankings, less than we had him in draft season. So those are my biggest fallers in the rest of season rankings over the last 2 weeks. Remember that you can see my exact rest of season rankings, and they're now updated to be used as a trade calculator on our website, thefantasyfootballadvice.com. That, my friends, is the end of this one. Hope you all enjoy. If you did, how about hitting the like button, and how about subscribing to the channel if you're new here? Thanks for watching.